Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Breakthrough Live. I am your host, Zoe Alexandra, and joined by your other host, Rania Khalek, who is back in Lebanon. Hello, Rania. How are you doing?
Bad. I'm doing well. I'm jet lagged, which is my caveat for any mistake I make today.
You're completely pardoned. You have preemptive immunity.
I love that. I have preemptive immunity. It takes me about a week to adjust. It's a 7-hour time difference. Bear with me, folks. However, I gotta say, I know we're gonna get into a bunch of stories today, but wow, should the Prime Minister and President of Lebanon get on the phone and thank those Iranians or what?
Really, and thank you in a way, because funnily enough, right when you arrived, you brought the ceasefire. With your journey.
Well, to be fair, the Israelis are still bombing. They actually, just before we started recording, I saw a news alert that they killed 4 people in the south. So they're going to keep, just going up right to the edge to see what they can get away with before this deal gets signed on Friday and afterwards. But we can get into some more of that. I know we've got to talk some shop.
We got to talk some shop. Yes, yeah. Well, some of you might be surprised to see us on YouTube right now. We decided to give you one more episode for free before we put the whole live stream behind the paywall. And as Rania has reiterated on multiple occasions, this does not mean that all of our content is going behind a paywall. We will be posting all of the segments from the show on YouTube every single week. But the whole live stream that you see right now, the fun little bits, the jokes about how Rania is single-handedly responsible for the ceasefire. All of that will be behind.
Hey, that was not a joke.
Yeah,
I just want to challenge the idea. Anyways, whatever.
Yeah, thank you. That was wrong.
Wow.
But all of that you will only get if you are a paid member of Breakthrough News, which you can do at breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. It's very, very easy, very simple. There you can pay as little as $5 a month. You can also be a, solidarity friend of the show, pay $25 and of BT, pay $25 a month. We actually need your support to keep this work going. Once again, we are not funded by Lockheed Martin. We are not funded by Larry Ellison, nor Elon Musk. We do not get millions from the billionaires and now trillionaires who are invested in fueling wars, fueling, division amongst the people and, all about their bottom line. So that's why we need you to go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe and become a member today, where you will get special newsletters. You'll get access to this full live stream and other perks that you can read about on our website. Rania, do you have anything else to say about our incredible subscription portal before we get into what the stories are today?
Yeah, I just want to note, if you are a patron, don't freak out. You will still get access to the live stream as well if you're a patron. We're just trying to encourage people to become members through our website, because Patreon, being the company that it is, does this thing where it takes a cut. So if you actually become a member through our website, which is at breakthroughnews.org/subscribe, Patreon doesn't take a cut. You are actually, everything you are giving goes directly to Breakthrough News, so we can continue providing you with our excellent commentary, journalism, analysis, everything that you see here and everything you see on our website. If you haven't checked out our new website, it got quite the glow up. It is beautiful and full of amazing journalistic content for you to read from all around the world, from a perspective that, again, not funded by Lockheed Martin. And that means something, guys. So breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. And like Zoe said, I'll reiterate it again before we get to our first guest here and all of our great, important stories. That doesn't mean the entire live stream, everything in it, is going to be behind a paywall. Our segments, our commentary, analysis with guests that we have on will go up as segments on YouTube, so you will be able to watch them there. But the full live stream, as it's playing in real time, like you're watching right now, will only be available to members. And that includes all of our banter. Plus, we will be giving people access to exclusive content such as Q&As, where you get to actually ask me and Zoe questions. Yes. And we will answer them, question and answer. It's right in there in the title. As well as other cool perks like merch, such as this very cool Breakthrough News mug, which I love. Not the straw, though. You have to get that on your own. It's a very cool straw. But all that's to say, there's other perks as well. Go check out our website, breakthroughnews.org/subscribe, and you can see the different tiers. And most importantly, I mean, we don't want to put anything behind a paywall, but, we live in a time where we have to, pay the people who create the amazing content that you see so that we can keep it going. In order to do that, we need your support. So breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. Go wild, Zoe.
Incredible. Well, with that, if you haven't subscribed, smash that like button and share this live stream right now. We have a very exciting show for you all today. Of course, the biggest story being the breakthrough in the Iran-U.S. talks. We have an incredible guest who's going to break that down for us today, which is Mohammed Marandi. We're also going to be speaking about the xenophobic riots that have broken out across the UK. We have a great guest who's going to be speaking about that. And right now, G7 leaders are gathered in France, and at the end of the week, the European Council will be meeting to approve a big, important budget. So we'll be getting to that with Mark Botenga. So if you're watching now, stay tuned, bookmark the page, smash that like button, and I think let's get right into our first story. So, as I said, over the past week, there has been a bout of racist violence that broke out first in the north of Ireland, in the city of Belfast, and then spread to other cities in Britain. And the racist riots, which are, this isn't the first time we've seen this in the UK, but it was supposedly took place in response to the video of a stabbing committed by a Sudanese migrant. And then later news that broke about someone that died from, a stabbing attack, I think it was a year back, that was carried out by a, migrant. And in response to these two kind of news items breaking, there were a series of violent riots that took place again in Belfast and in other cities, targeting immigrants on the streets, burning their homes, intimidation and hate speech taking place online. So really horrendous stuff that it has been taking place. And to break all of that down and to explain kind of how this happened and what really are the underlying causes of that, we are very lucky to be joined by Dr. Edward Anderson. He is an assistant professor at Northumbria University and senior fellow at SOAS University of London. Ed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much. It's nice to speak to you both.
Great. So, our viewership largely located in North America perhaps has not been as in tune to what did take place and has been taking place across Britain and the north of Ireland. Can you give us a bit of a recap of what took place and what actually gave rise to these violent incidents?
Sure. So the racist violence, the riots, obviously are part of a much longer trajectory. But in terms of what's happened in the immediate past, what we saw was two unconnected, terrible attacks on innocent civilians, one taking place in Southampton in the very south of England at the end of May, the other taking place on the 8th of June in Northern Ireland. And the first attack took place, it was a Polish-British student called Henry Nowak, who was attacked and killed by a British Sikh man. And then not long afterwards, on the 8th of June, there was an attempted murder, allegedly by a Sudanese immigrant. And both of these awful attacks were immediately jumped upon by the far right, were manipulated, were turned into the kind of whipping up of tensions and ultimately violent far right rioting in both Southampton and in Northern Ireland, and attacks on the police, and attacks that drove people from their homes. Homes were burned down, families, there were images of children fleeing their burning homes, innocent migrant families and others, for that matter. Entire communities were really those were at risk. And this all kind of happened alongside various political leaders and various sections of the media contributing towards the whipping up of tension, the scapegoating of entire migrant communities. And this is, as I said, part of a much longer picture as well.
Well, no, I'm glad you mentioned that it's part of a much longer picture, because it's not the first time. There have been riots of this type in the north of Ireland and Britain, which have left immigrant families and communities extremely vulnerable. And at the same time, we saw far-right Reform UK score a historic victory in recent council elections. Why has the government been unable to curb such outbursts of xenophobic violence? And what, in your opinion, Ed, is actually at the root of this violence?
Well, you're right. This is part of a bigger picture. And as you mentioned, there's one of several right-wing parties in the UK, Reform, which is led by Nigel Farage, who is a friend of Trump's and quite frequently visits the United States. And he's also quite close to far-right leaders, nationalists, populists across the world. He's done quite well, or his party have done well in these local elections. But this is part of a much longer picture of the kind of appeasement of far-right politics and a real shift in political discourse in this country. I mean, look, there's a narrative that Britain has welcomed immigrants in the past. I think a lot of historians, myself included, would question that. But certainly, in more recent decades, and particularly since the Conservative government from 2010 onwards, there has been a real ramping up of hostility towards immigration and immigrants. And partly that was through this policy, or series of policies known as the hostile environment, brought in by Theresa May in 2012. And then subsequently, a lot of the campaigning around the Brexit campaign, the leaving of the European Union, which took place in 2016. That also, of course, Nigel Farage, who you see on the screen, was a central figure in that. That also involved a lot of scapegoating of migrants, a lot of anti-immigrant and racist rhetoric. And then, more recently, we've seen a kind of just continual real shift into far-right politics, the sorts of language and division that previously was the preserve of fairly extreme sections of the political sort of spectrum has become very much normalized. And even the Labour Party, which has now been in power for a year or so, even the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has kind of engaged in that sort of rhetoric. And it's become, much more mainstream. So this is part of a much bigger picture of racist violence and racist rhetoric that hasn't really been effectively shut down, and in fact is often valorized and sort of legitimized by the media and other parts of the kind of political establishment as well.
Well, it's interesting that you do mention the Labour Party there, because Labour PM Keir Starmer, who has, again, stubbornly remained in office amid widespread rejection of his mandate. But he expressed his condemnation of this violence. And, it seems like for centrists like him, it's very easy to point the finger at Nigel Farage, figures like Tommy Robinson, for driving such sentiments, yet his government has been responsible for prioritizing military spending over social spending, vilifying the Palestine solidarity movement in the UK, and at the same time upholding the interest of, the ethno-supremacist state of Israel. So is Labour, despite condemning what happened, at all responsible for what took place this past week?
Yes, I mean, I think in short, one could say that. I mean, if one thinks about it in a longer sort of historical trajectory. So yes, Labour and Starmer have been quite forthright, rather uncharacteristically forthright in condemning the racist anti-immigrant rhetoric that we've seen and the violence on the streets as well. So that has been shut down by the government in a relatively sort of frank way. However, if you go back even just a year, we have Keir Starmer calling Britain an island of strangers due to immigration. Remember, Starmer came into power after the sort of the left of the party had been crushed and Jeremy Corbyn, who obviously has a much more sympathetic view to immigration and multiculturalism after he had been deposed. And Starmer went about essentially establishing the Labour Party as being the antithesis of everything Corbyn stood for. And that extended to immigration. And he's really tried to kind of appease the far right. He's tried to share their legitimate concerns on immigration, and really attempted to sort of stem the flow of votes from the Labour Party to more right-wing political parties, including the Conservatives and the Reform, even though he managed to win an enormous majority in the election. So arguably he had a mandate that didn't require that, although I suppose part of his campaign was fairly anti-immigration. So I think one can certainly blame the kind of government in certain respects for, I think, legitimizing, mainstreaming, normalizing that sort of position and failing to make a more robust defense of multiculturalism, and the sort of values of tolerance and unity and solidarity that many people see as quite a fundamental part of what the Labour Party, or at least the Labour movement, has stood for in this country for well over a century.
It's there's so many parallels to the situation in the U.S. In terms of the way that the Democratic Party is responsible for so many of the same policies that Republicans carry out when they're in power, but just take to another level, and ratchet up to that fascist level. And also help mainstream the kind of bigotry, exactly what you're talking about. But also there's this element of, obviously white nationalists are going to be white nationalists, right? They're always going to be xenophobic. But there's this element in the US that we have where there are waves of migration that are taking place specifically because of US policies across places like Latin America. I think Europe is more impacted by the policies the US and the Europeans who follow enact across the Middle East and Africa, because a lot of refugees from those places end up in Europe. And I'm just curious if there's anybody politically relevant in the UK making that connection. Obviously, we are all for tolerance and multiculturalism, and we shouldn't be treating immigrants or people who aren't white in a negative way. But on top of that, the people who are the most virulently xenophobic are also the one destroying and destabilizing so many countries and other parts of the world that are creating waves of migration in the first place. And I guess that's more a comment than a question, but is that conversation happening in the UK? That's my question.
I think it is to some extent. I mean, whether or not that's percolated into a more mainstream discourse is another matter. I think there are certainly people having that conversation. And of course, there's a longer story there, which is one of colonialism and the impact of imperialism. I mean, the product of not just racism and even the concepts of race itself, but also immigration and the flows of people and the kind of dislocation of peoples that coincided with imperialism and decolonization. These are things that have led Britain to be the country it is in terms of its demographic makeup. The former leader of the Race Relations Institute in the UK, A. Sivanandan, put this best when he said, "We are here because you were there." So I think there clearly is a connection there. And I would also like to draw one other connection, which is, with these kind of global, I've spoken about a kind of wider network of far right and anti-immigrant sort of sentiment and politics. And that's quite clearly not just national, but global as well. And it's closely connected up with the US in many senses too. With Trump, of course, various US politicians have made extremely unhelpful and incendiary comments in relation to the recent tensions in the UK. And of course, Elon Musk, and other sort of people on the sort of fascist spectrum have also engaged in that sort of rhetoric as well. Musk, I think, has been using his platform to say that civil war is inevitable. So clearly, there's lots of influences going on there that's leading to this sort of division. But equally, I think, if one wants to be a little bit optimistic, there is also networks of solidarity and progressiveness and more sort of radical and pro-multicultural forms of of discourse which are also transnational and which perhaps can lead to a more sort of optimistic outcome as well.
I wanted to hit on that point before we let you go, Ed, which is that, in response to the xenophobic violence that took place over the last week, we saw several cities organize anti-fascist demonstrations. What is the task now of progressive and left forces in the UK, and how can society move forward from incidents like these?
Well, the task is obviously solidarity, unity, the politics of progress and peace, and loving your neighbour. And clearly, if we follow those sorts of tenets, we're going to live in a place we're going to live in societies and communities that are much better to live in than ones in which we're sowing division and hatred and hostility. We have seen, tens and hundreds of thousands of people out on the street, either calling for unity in this country or calling for justice for victims of violence and oppression in Palestine and other parts of the world. I guess we need to continue fighting for that. And in the same way that far-right anti-immigrant rhetoric has become mainstreamed, we need to push back and allow that more radical, progressive politics of solidarity to become mainstreamed, and to make, you referred earlier to Labour as centrist. I mean, one fears that on certain issues they've become kind of centre-right, and actually to make them realise that that they're not going to be able to appease the far right, and they're not going to get far right votes. And actually, we need to make a robust argument for the benefits of multiculturalism and the realities of multiculturalism. We live in a multicultural society, and we need to promote that and get back to understanding why that's a good thing, and not constantly framing it disingenuously and against the facts as a bad thing, because it's just simply not the case.
Well, Dr. Edward Anderson, thank you so much for joining us and breaking all of this down, and we hope to see you back on Breakthrough Live very soon.
Thanks so much. It's great talking to you both.
Amazing. I mean, it is really, I know we've been busy with the Knicks, with the World Cup, but, seeing those images is really quite shocking. Just imagining being just a person who happens to be from an immigrant background, or, whose parents immigrated to the UK, and just having your house or shop burned down because crazy right-wing, thugs are just running wild. It's really horrifying.
And one thing I just want to say before we move on to our next story here is what he was talking about with like the sort of international element of the far right. He was talking about a sort of like Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, have visited the States. There is an international far right, and they have entire media platforms funded by these billionaire oligarchs. I mean, Elon Musk owns Twitter. That's a huge part of the media as well, right? So the trillionaire, the first trillionaire owns Twitter. But you also have Rupert Murdoch and others like him who have so many papers and news channels that are just promoting this xenophobia. And they were actually, I think there was a report that came out, it might have been from Amnesty, about how there was a proliferation of the video of the Sudanese migrant who carried out a violent attack on somebody that went viral, that was spread across these far right platforms to try to provoke people to go out and basically carry out a race riot and attempted lynchings. So there is media, and I raise that to say that's why you got to support independent media, folks. That is not funded by right-wing oligarchs. So Patreon, I'm sorry, not Patreon. We're trying to move people to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. That's not me trying to sit here and grift. It's saying that it's really, really important that you have platforms like Breakthrough News that are not just challenging the xenophobia, but talking about the real reasons people don't have access to the things they want access to, and are, these right-wing media platforms are blaming immigrants for it instead of blaming the people who are funding the channels that are telling you to blame immigrants. Anyways, it's
insane. No, it's crazy. But we are going to go to our next story. Europe, staying on Europe. Sorry, everyone. But A lot is happening there. Trump is in Europe. He is attending the G7 meeting being hosted by Emmanuel Macron in France. And at the end of the week, the European Council, will be meeting to finalize their 7-year budget. So a lot on the table right now with Europe, as we know that there has been this kind of manufactured kind of rift growing between Trump and the European leaders. Is that real? Is it just kind of like a facade? But we are very lucky today to be joined by Mark Botenga, who is a member of European Parliament with the Workers' Party of Belgium, who is going to talk about all of that and more. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, big week in Europe. G7 again is meeting in France. Trump, of course, has his sights set on regaining the trust and admiration that in many ways he barely lost from the European leaders due to the war in Iran. But notably, Egypt, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have been extended an invite to this summit and are in attendance. So what is the agenda of European leaders in this G7 summit? And in your opinion, what should it be?
Well, it's a very, very broad question. I think the first thing to point out, unfortunately, that indeed Trump has very little credibility, and his word is not taken, how would I say, at face value anymore, because he can change his opinion in a very, very short time. But there is one thing that it's kind of astonishing to me that European leaders still treat him as kind of this figure. They try to kind of convince, try to court him in a way. He gets this very nice palace-like reception in France. Dinner in very nice rooms, and fireworks. So he's more being courted in a way, I would say, rather than that the Europeans are trying to convince him. It's more of a let's see how nice we can be, and we're all on the same side kind of thing. So this submissiveness of on behalf of European leaders really is astonishing, and in my opinion not great. Doesn't give a great image of Europe either. Now, definitely, what we need to point out is this meeting brings together, first of all, losers. It's a losing team. The G7 is a losing team. If you look at, GDP, the share of growth in the world, the G7 have been losing out over the last years, and arguably more. So you have a group of powers, a club of powers that tries to preserve a world order that they see slipping away from them, right? The center of the world economy is moving towards Asia. You see other powers in South America, in Africa rising. And so the idea of the Europeans is very much, on the one hand, to keep the United States committed to supporting Ukraine, for them to continue in one way or another supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia. And secondly, and this is why they're inviting a number of other countries. I mean, it's not just the ones that you have mentioned. You can also see that at some point Brazil has been invited. There's South Africa has been disinvited. On the other hand, China didn't want to come, but you'll have India, you'll have Kenya coming. And so the idea is kind of to see, can we form kind of a Western bloc in a way? Also to unite it, then potentially against Russia, against China, but at least to have a very, strong Western bloc. That's very, very concerning, because you were asking what the agenda should be, and I would like an agenda that would be much more open. That would also be self-critical. Okay, why does one of the rising powers, or maybe the rising power, China is not coming? Why is that? Shouldn't we look more at multilateralism? What have we been doing wrong? Why, for example, is this world order? Why do we absolutely want to salvage it? So in this sense, I think the idea is very much the one of a conservative number of countries that are wondering now, how do we need to innovate to keep control of part of the world?
I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to laugh out loud, but that was hysterical. The team of losers. I'm laughing again. Wow. G7, team of losers. But no, you make a very good point. We wanted to ask you also, Mark, about the fact that, We've got this Iran deal, the Iran-U.S. Memorandum of Understanding agreement that's supposed to be signed on Friday. It's a huge breakthrough after 3 months of just like grueling war. And some think that Trump may also want to try to push for peace in Eastern Europe. So the question is, why are European leaders so against reaching a negotiated settlement in Ukraine? And why are they so determined to sanction Russia, but then refuse to take any action against Israel, which by all measures is, winning in barbarism and brutality?
Well, that's obviously the double standards we have seen very clearly over, arguably a longer period of time, but especially over the last 2.5 years, where indeed Russia has, since 2022, really had over 20 sanction packages from the European Union, while Israel, on the other hand, has seen none. So that is extremely impressive. And basically, we see similarities because we see violations of international law, we see war crimes, we see, a lot of similarities in the crimes. But looking at it from the European establishment, things look very differently. They see, on the one hand, on let's say the Russian-Ukraine thing, Russia is an obstacle today to also the expansion of let's say the Western, be it NATO expansion, be it the expansion of the European Union, because obviously Russia wants its own sphere of influence. Russia is fighting not just in Ukraine but also in other countries, to maintain its own sphere of influence. Very, very clear about that. And in this sense, the weakening Russia is because it's very often very interesting when you listen to the speeches in the European Parliament, for example. It's very much as much about weakening Russia as it is about supporting Ukraine. While these two are not necessarily, how would I say, connected. I mean, there's obviously a connection on the battlefield, but that's one thing. Secondly, indeed, it would be a point that after this many years of war and destruction, it would be time for diplomacy. And you have seen some European leaders, either privately or very cautiously, admitting to this, saying, that there's probably no military solution to this, the death and destruction should stop, but without actually, taking a strong diplomatic lead. That diplomatic lead has been taken at some point by the United States, but also by China, by the African countries, by the Vatican, and so on. So there's some strategic thought behind it, also internally, domestically, because obviously the war with Russia gives a very strong argument for militarization domestically. We have seen certain politicians make the point, but workers should not ask for too many wage increases, or yes, they need to work longer shifts because, there's a war with Russia. So it's also used as an argument for domestic, let's say, social destruction, right? Not a detail. And it's used as an argument for domestic militarization also in the shift in production. We need to produce more weapons. We need to invest more in the arms industry because Russia. There's a big contradiction on this because the establishment discourse on the one hand says, we can beat Russia. Russia's almost beaten in Ukraine. And at the same time, Russia's ready to invade Europe. Now, both cannot be true at the same time. They cannot and lose Ukraine and conquer Europe. So you can see that there's obviously a fog of war or propaganda narrative ongoing. Now, Israel is a very different case for the European establishment. Israel is embedded in the European system. Everything Israel does is in one way or another supported by be the United States, be the European countries. This is very important. Israel plays the role of a little bit of how did the German chancellor said, they're doing the dirty work in the Middle East by attacking Iran, by attacking Lebanon, and so on, occupying part of Syria, doing the ethnic cleansing and the genocide in Palestine. This was called at some point by the German chancellor doing Europe's or the West's dirty work. So basically, Israel being embedded in the Western system makes it, that we look the other way when they commit crimes, and we continue to send them weapons, we continue to fund them, we continue to be completely complicit in all of these crimes. And this is the message we're sending. Like, we will, criticize and condemn, sanction crimes by others, but we demand the right to commit crimes ourselves. So that is obviously pushing us towards a world order that's extremely dangerous, where the UN Charter, international law have no more value. And you can see that shift also rhetorically. The European Union now very often speaks about a rules-based order. It doesn't speak about an order ruled by the UN Charter or international law. A rules-based order is a very different concept, because who sets the rules? Who sets the rules? Is it the international law? Is it the UN Charter? Or is it the rules that the West or the Europeans want to impose on the rest of the world, which is a very, arbitrary system of rules?
Well, yeah, I think, and you've done a great job of this, speaking out on the floor of European Parliament to all these kind of war maniacs who seem very content on continuing to support the genocidal state. But back in Brussels at the end of this week, a little closer to where you are, the European Council is going to meet to discuss the bloc's new 7-year budget. And it seems to largely be dominated by military spending. And this is guised as, quote, defense, security, space. But again, really, it's about military spending. So talk to us about the stakes of this meeting, and why is it that European leaders are so intent on military spending right now?
Well, let's first look at one of the absurdities of this entire debate. We've been debating how much % of our GDP should go into military affairs, into war, into defense, whatever you want to call it. And then it was 5% because NATO and Trump pushed for that. And some are now speaking about 3.5%. But this is a very weird way of looking at expenditure. In no other sector would you do this. Like, you would look, education, right? You would look at, okay, how many schools do we need? How many teachers do we need? How many hospitals do we need? How many nurses? How many doctors? And then you would adjust spending accordingly. What we see in defense is like, okay, we need to spend at least this much of all wealth produced in our country to military matters, meaning that if you produce more, you also need to spend more on defense. That is not a way of looking at defense or territorial defense. So it's about much more than this. What is it about? It is that what I was saying before, about the club of losers. This is economically true, and the Europeans feel this as well. This was also true on innovation, on many topics. Europe's been weakening because of its completely nonsensical economic policies, of austerity, of not having a public industrial policy, and so on. And so one of the ways to stay what they euphemistically call a global player is to militarize. And hence we see that in this massive defense expenditure drive, there's also a lot of how would I say, much of an offensive attacking posture. So you will be seeing, for example, that France or Belgium are going to be buying or producing blinded vehicles designed mostly for Western Africa. Now, we are not defending ourselves in Western Africa. When Trump was attacking Iran, he said, no, we're going to defend our troops there. But, you're literally on the other side of the world attacking. That's not defensive. When you see the talk in France about a new aircraft carrier, long-range missiles discussion also in other countries, these are not weapons that are designed mainly or even at all for defensive purposes. These are to project power and to be able to intervene on the other side of the world, be it even in the Indo-Pacific, right? So this is one story. A second story is obviously that those that want to be very close to the United States, they say, no, but we need to take over the military control of Europe. Not necessarily in a defensive perspective again, in a very, how would I call it, expansionist view as well, saying, we want to control our neighborhood, be it the southern neighborhood, being the northern neighborhood. So all of this pushes then towards this militarization. There's going to be a lot of debate on how much Europe should do, how much member states should do. We see that today the militarization drive in Europe is strongest, arguably, in Germany, which has most money left, which can borrow or lend as much money as it wants, basically. And so this also creates more inequality inside Europe. Germany will not only have the strongest economy, it will also have the strongest army. Uh-oh. Very troublesome, very worrisome if you look at history.
For some reason I feel for some reason that makes me uncomfortable. A strong German army. Well, I don't know why, but there's just my gut tells me that's not a good thing.
No. Unfortunately, I heard the German chancellor at some point saying, I want the strongest army in Europe. And I was like, that's a very, very weird metric to have. You could have a metric to say, I want to be able to defend myself. I want to be able to guarantee peace and security. I don't know what. I mean, you could have different metrics.
I wish people wanted to invest in like building, in like housing everybody and giving everyone healthcare and like curing
Absolutely.
cancer as much as they want to have the biggest defense budget in like all of the land.
We're sending these letters, like many ministries of defense what's it called now in the US, secretaries of war, are sending letters to young people to say, don't you want to enlist and join the army or whatever? Why don't we do that for other things? Why don't we do that for doctors or whatever you need in your society? And teachers, also on industry,
Nursing
by the way.
deficit.
If we want to create jobs, like the defense industry, the arms industry, it yields a lot less jobs, almost none compared to other sectors. Like, so if it's about job creation, quality job creation, that is not the first sector you would go and look to. It's also not a very productive sector, because once you got, you've got your 1,000 tanks, what are you going to do with it? You're not going to use them to go to the supermarket or to go to drive to school. So they're standing there unless you go to war. So you create a structural incentive to have a war economy to keep your production going.
And again, the last time that Germany had a war economy, things turned out pretty bad for a lot of people. I wanted to ask you, Mark, about one last thing here as we wrap up. And that is the supposed divide between, big bad Trump and the kind, soft, diplomatic Europeans. Because, commentators often speculate about that growing divide. And it's, they blame it on Trump's rash measures, his anti-immigrant crackdown, his really just like reckless tariffs, the new wars, for example, the one he just launched against Iran that screwed the world economy. Can you, I don't know, sometimes that divide seems like more of a show, because we talked about earlier how European leaders still end up lining up for the most part behind the U.S., whether it's Biden or Trump in charge. So what really is the state of U.S. relations? And is it any part of it actually in danger because of big, bad, crazy, mentally ill, demented Trump?
I will not laugh out loud, Rania, but this description was very very evocative and creative.
You're welcome.
Listen, it's there's indeed this speculation. To be honest, the EU has caved a lot. We've had this discussion on Greenland, and I was very much, oh no, Trump will never take Greenland. In the end, we started negotiating and asking him, how many bases do you want, right? So. And then now we just approved the trade deal, which is a very bad trade deal for the EU. It's like it puts like 15% tariffs on many EU goods, but gives tariff-free access to EU markets for US goods. So that's completely imbalanced. And moreover, we then committed to buying, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of energy and arms in the US. So it's very imbalanced. I would say we've got this structural, submissiveness towards the United States, economically, but also politically, ideologically, which is an issue. There is now an increasing conscience, I would say, on behalf of certain European leaders, certain European countries, that we need more independence, autonomy. But what we are warning for is that we should not try to copy-paste the US model. That European countries in the past, that European autonomy is not necessarily a good thing if it serves to do the same thing the United States are doing throughout the world. If it is to go back to a European colonialism, a European imperialism, most European countries, many European countries have been colonial powers, have continued these neo-colonial imperialist policies also on their own. They didn't need the US for that. So if the idea is to construct an autonomous, independent, or more autonomous, more independent Europe, to then copy-paste the United States, cutting back on all public services, on social rights, and so on, in order to go and dominate, the Middle East, Africa, whatever, that's not the kind of Europe we want. So we need to, on the one hand, of course, say we need more autonomy from the United States, and on the other hand, say we want a fundamentally different Europe. Right, we don't want to copy a Europe made in USA, to put it this way, right? And in that sense, there is a growing consciousness, a growing awareness, I would say, of the problem of dependency vis-a-vis Washington. But very often the ruling classes are then manipulating that to say, but hey, Europe should be able to play that global part, right? Well, we are saying, no, listen, we have a fundamentally different model in mind. We don't need a Europe that's going to go to war wherever there's a crisis, or wherever they think they should go to war. We need a Europe that talks to people, other countries, in a respectful way, that does diplomacy, and that at the same time guarantees, social rights and fundamental freedoms inside Europe. But that's obviously going to be a big battle. We're going to be waging and continue to wage over the next, I'd say, weeks, but it might be slightly longer than that.
Well, Mark Botenga, thank you so much for joining us here at BT Live. We will be hearing from you again soon, surely, because it is going to be a hot summer for sure.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a very good day.
Crazy.
Hot girl summer, hot Europe summer, hot.
I mean, it's just like in the past like 5 days, not only did the Knicks win the NBA Finals, not only did the World Cup start, not only was it the Stanley Cup and some insane UFC fight, and all of that's just sports, but also like the Iran deal, the G7 meeting. So if it continues at this pace, it's a lot.
I mean, yeah, let's see. Speaking of the World Cup, I mean, it's wild. The Iranian team is not allowed to stay in the U.S. So they've had to. Claudia Scheinbaum was asked by FIFA to provide basically them a home base in Mexico. Some of the games are taking place in Mexico, but a lot of them are in the U.S. So for the U.S. games, I think they have to fly in the same day,
and fly back.
And they're not allowed to stay overnight, exactly. So that just puts them at a disadvantage. I mean, and also like with the Americans, like you never know what they're going to. I mean, I would be scared to be an Iranian national inside America who isn't also like an American or other citizen. But on top of that, there's been like politics around it too. Like I know there was a game today between Iran and New Zealand, and unfurling. Oh, sorry. For me, it was.
Oh, it was your morning. Sorry.
It was my morning. Yeah. Well, it was like middle of the night, but anyways. So yeah, wow. Way too
North American exceptionalism. Yeah, that was
actually
messed up.
Actually. But they unfurled the flag of the nation's team that's playing. They unfurled the Iranian flag, and it was in the US. So it was like a whole thing about, oh my God, that's like a big deal to have. And then on top of that, I know there was people in the stands who put up the Minab, the name of the school that the Americans bombed, and they put the number of dead, I think it's like 180. So that was just a very politicized or political moment. And then on top of that, you had these Iranian diaspora pro-monarchy people, pro-Shah people that were like protesting the team.
Right.
It was just very odd.
Their home base is in LA, so that's like kind of.
That's true. The Iranian monarchist diaspora.
But on the other hand, I saw there's been so many. I'm on Twitter all the time, and once you engage with like one video of one type, it just kind of dominates. So I've seen a lot of
all of them exactly.
Yeah, and so right now I'm seeing a lot of videos of like the Iranian team or at their home base in Mexico yesterday leaving, and there were all these Mexican fans that were like lined up outside their home base to get their autograph, and I was like, that's really sweet. Like they really like they're getting treated like they're criminals, and they are literally just football players trying to engage in the World Cup like any other team. And, they've continued to have visa issues. Members of their technical team have continued to have visa issues. It just, this is what happens when the U.S. hosts the World Cup. It's sick.
Right.
So
to add one more thing, I just want to say in the Lebanon right now, they're whispering it if they're not supposed to say it out loud, depending on what community they're from or what the politics around them is. They are thanking Iran right now. Yeah. The only reason the war on Lebanon might come to some sort of end if the Israelis don't like blow everything up is because Iran has, from the beginning of these negotiations with the U.S., insisted on including Lebanon. And there is a draft that's been leaked, that's been going around online, leaked interestingly enough by like a bunch of neocon reporters. And the first point is a ceasefire in Lebanon. And then you had Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, come out to say today that the Israeli occupation of Lebanon would be considered a violation of this coming agreement with the Americans and would make the agreement null and void. That's a really big deal for the Iranian foreign minister to come out and say that.
Yeah.
And we're hearing more and more about, now we heard from Hezbollah's media office just a few hours ago saying the Iranians told them that within the 60 days that this agreement is supposed to take place before the final part of it, they will give Israel till that final part of the agreement to withdraw from Lebanon. And if the Israelis don't, it will void the agreement. So the Iranians are making this a very serious condition. This basically means that it's kind of up to Netanyahu whether this agreement stands or not. And that means it's up to the Americans to shut Netanyahu down.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. But I just have to, the reason I brought that up is because there are people in Lebanon who don't like Iran, who don't like Hezbollah, but who are saying, at least privately and some publicly, that you know what? I know that Iran's doing this for whatever reasons Iran needs to do this for. I don't even care. But this is really important that this is happening, and thank you, Iran. And I was also thinking to myself, if this actually does work out, the Lebanese government needs to have host a dinner for the Iranians, because that's the only reason. They've done nothing but insult and condemn Iran since this started. Even at one point demanding that the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon leave the country. They tried to deport the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon.
Jesus Christ.
We'll see what happens. But I'm just imagining there's going to have to be some sort of phone call of apology at some point. But all that's to say, I'm just kind of setting up for our guest if you want to take that on.
No, and I mean, I'm also very excited to hear this. Rania, this morning you were able to interview Mohammed Marandi, professor at the University of Tehran in American Studies. He's an incredible, analyst. And so I think he's of course going to be speaking about, you guys spoke about, what does this memorandum of understanding mean? What are we going to see this Friday with this deal being signed, and kind of how Lebanon became the central kind of red line for Iran. So let's hear that interview right now.
The U.S. and Iran have agreed to a memorandum of understanding expected to be formally signed Friday in Switzerland. But with Israeli strikes on Lebanon continuing right up to the signing, the big question hanging over this deal is whether Israel ends up blowing it up before it even takes effect. Joining us to discuss is Professor Mohammed Marandi, an expert in American Studies at the University of Tehran. Mohammed Marandi, welcome back to BT Live.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure being on your show.
Well, there's so much to talk about because, of course, this new huge breakthrough with this memorandum of understanding. There's potentially a draft going around online that's upsetting people in Washington. And one of the most, I think, important or maybe newsworthy parts of this potential deal, this upcoming deal, is the Lebanon angle, because of the way Lebanon can be used by the Israelis to torpedo it. Now, Iran has insisted that Lebanon be a part of any broader settlement throughout this war, and even struck Israel last week after Israeli attacks on Beirut's southern suburbs. And then today we saw that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that continued Israeli attacks or any ongoing occupation in Lebanon would violate the agreement with Washington, and that the U.S. must rein in Israel. And for his part, Trump has voiced anger at Israel over Lebanon through a social media post, and then reportedly a heated phone call with Netanyahu. But he hasn't really taken, at least so far, any concrete action beyond that, while Israel insists the deal doesn't bind it and says it will not withdraw its forces. So my question for you is, how serious is Iran about the Lebanon front? And do you expect an Iranian response if Israel keeps testing this, which we know that they will?
Well, first I have to go back a bit and point out that when the Israelis threatened to bomb Beirut and Dahia, which is the southern part of Beirut, for those who, I know you live there and you know it, but for your audience, some of them may not know that. Dahia is a huge neighborhood in Beirut, and probably during this period when refugees were flowing from the south and the Lebanese government was preventing them from going to many parts of the country, which is unbelievable. But in any case, that's what happened. Many of them went to Dahia. So probably when the Israelis were bombing, were threatening to bomb Dahia, it was probably half the population of Beirut, the entire Beirut, half of it Dahia under these circumstances, I would imagine. So the Iranians threatened them, and for a few days, the regime, they refrained from bombing. They just stuck to bombing other cities and apartment blocks and killing children in villages, women in towns, but refrained from doing it in Beirut. And then they carried out this small attack on Dahia. I mean, bombs blew up, but it was small because I think they wanted so that Iran wouldn't respond, so that Iran would calculate and say, well, this wasn't big enough for us to strike back. And then my guess is that they would carry out another small strike after a few days, and then another one after a few days, and then normalize bombing Beirut. Mm-hmm. But the Iranians said, no, you crossed the red line, and we will hit you very hard. And they did. And in this exchange, it was the Israelis and the Americans that wanted it to end. So then Netanyahu again struck Dahia. And this is where it gets interesting, even more interesting. And he again murdered 3 or 4 people, I'm not sure. A family was murdered. And in the previous attack, I think 2 people were murdered. Just so we always repeat these things, that the Israelis are just constantly murdering people everywhere, slaughtering. Right now, as we speak, they're murdering in Gaza. They are slaughtering people on a daily basis. And the West is completely indifferent. The elites, the media, the think tankers, the journalists, the diplomats. But in any case, the Iranians again said, okay, we're going to strike very hard. This is the night before last. So Iran was about to strike. And I knew it because I also, I was told so. And I tweeted that Iran will strike very hard. And the negotiations ended. The Iranians said, we're not going to negotiate, and we're going to hit the Israeli regime. Trump, I don't know if I can say he panicked, but obviously he was very worried. And he quickly asked Iran not to strike. He insulted Netanyahu. And but more importantly was that, contrary to what Trump was saying, and contrary to what the Pakistani prime minister said a couple of days ago, there was no final text. And there were some significant differences that remained between Iran and the United States in this MOU. And it was stalemate. And it was unclear if we were even going to have an agreement. So Trump tells his people to give the Iranians the concessions they want. And at the top of the list, and at the beginning of now Iranian shipping is going through the Indian Ocean without any trouble since yesterday. Another one, though, as I said, at the top of the MOU, when it's published, you'll see that is Lebanon. Mm-hmm. That its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and so on. All of this has to be respected. But if the war, and you saw the Iranian foreign minister today saying that any attack on Lebanon, any occupation, that Lebanon, Hezbollah is a part of this deal. And so the Israeli regime, if it does not withdraw and end what it's doing in Lebanon, there's no peace. So the Iranians got that concession from the Americans, and the deal was announced. And so we are where we are. Now, does that mean that we are celebrating in Tehran? And, well, actually, some people are very angry in Iran, and they're saying that we shouldn't have signed the deal and we should have pushed harder and gotten a better deal later. But anyway, I've met a couple. I'm on the streets. I've met a couple of people who are very angry with me, as if I'm a negotiator. But anyway, when Dr. Zarif was negotiating the JCPOA, some people attacked me. And then when I went with Dr. Balgari to help with the media then too, they attacked me. Now,
You can't.
Whatever happens, I have to pay the price.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are some people in Iran who are opposed to the deal. There's no doubt about that. But I think that I do think in all it is a good deal. But it's not as if anyone is celebrating. No one here is naive, and no one believes that the Americans or the Israelis are going to carry out their commitments. And Netanyahu is, of course, Netanyahu. He's a genocidal maniac who leads a country full of genocidal maniacs. So I can't say what will happen in the future, but this is going to be a very complicated process. But
Yeah.
Iran is adamant. Iran, under no circumstances, will allow the Israeli regime to remain in Lebanon and to continue killing Lebanese citizens.
I was thinking to myself today as I'm like watching this news come out about the Iranian foreign minister saying, we're demanding Israeli withdrawal. And then there's news that came out that Hezbollah's media relations actually said that the Iranians have given them basically a guarantee that we are going to push for Israel to withdraw or like we won't abide by a deal. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, like this must be a really hard day for the Lebanese prime minister and foreign minister and president who've been demanding that Iran stop interfering in Lebanon's sovereignty by getting it a ceasefire. Just wild to watch all this play out. But I wanted to ask you, one of the criticisms I've seen, and just very briefly, because there's like two more questions I want to get to, and I want to make sure we have time to touch on it. But I want to ask you about Gaza, because I have seen some criticism or question about why Iran hasn't applied the same leverage it has to Gaza that it has applied to Lebanon. So I'm curious, what do you think the reason for that is?
Oh, there's a big difference. First of all, Iran was assaulted, and that gave Iran the international, let's say, support to strike back. If the Israeli regime had not struck us, if the Americans had not struck us, especially this war, much more important than the previous war. After this war, and our 39 days of striking at Israel and the United States and its assets in the Persian Gulf and so on, striking the Israeli regime is normal. It's been normalized. But if we had done this on our own, at our own initiative before, do you think any of those countries that people consider to be our friends and allies in the global majority would have supported us? Absolutely not. Remember, Iran, and you know this, I know this, and your audience knows this. The only country that is standing up against genocide and ethnic cleansing in Palestine is Iran and Yemen and Hezbollah, which is not a country, and the resistance in Iraq. No one else is. No one else will take a stand. No one else will even cut ties with the Israeli regime. No one else will even cut trade. Right now, during this global energy crisis, the Aliyev in Azerbaijan is sending cheap oil to Netanyahu through the middleman, Erdogan. Sisi is purchasing gas. Jordan is doing everything. So it is Iran on its own. Iran is standing up against the entire empire and its coalition, the Europeans, NATO, its local proxies, even those who are not directly involved against us, they are not helping us. I mean, NATO installations in Turkey and US bases in Turkey were working against us. So it's not as if Iran has, all this global support and state support. Now Iran is being cheered on across the world. Even in the United States, the Iranian national football team is being cheered. But it doesn't have, you cannot, Iran will not have support if it just starts firing missiles at the Israeli regime.
Well, I guess,
But
what I guess the question I'm maybe I should have phrased this differently. I guess the question I've seen people asking is the way that Iran is saying Israeli withdrawal, no more attacks on Lebanon. Why aren't they demanding the same thing for Gaza in this agreement with the U.S.? That's the question I've seen people raising.
okay, well that's a different issue, but that is also a problem for a couple of reasons. One is that right now we're talking, Lebanon is under assault and there's no ceasefire. And so the war which is taking place, is between the United States and the Israeli regime, Iran and Lebanon.
Mhm.
And so Iran is saying, whatever, if there's a ceasefire with us, it's with Lebanon. If there's a withdrawal of forces, it's in Lebanon too. We are one and the same.
Mhm.
So that's with regards to the current war. But Iran has also said that the Israeli regime has to end the slaughter in Gaza, and that will be discussed at the negotiations. Now, the problem, Gaza and Palestine will be a part of the negotiations, but the problem, Rania, is that regional countries went to Egypt and endorsed Trump's fake ceasefire and helped impose it on the Palestinian people. All of them, Abdullah, Sisi, Aliyev, Erdogan, from the Persian Gulf, from Pakistan. So it is difficult for Iran to push very hard, because they'll say they already have a ceasefire. So what Iran will try to do at the time being is to say, okay, then force the Israelis back to the yellow line and stop the killing. That's because they have a ceasefire. Iran can't say, no, we reject this this ceasefire where tens of heads of state were there and they all endorse it. You have to do it's not going to work. But Iran, as you know, is the only country that helps the resistance in Gaza. Iran, no one here hides this fact. They are rebuilding their military capabilities, but I think that the burden that's on the shoulders of Iran and Hezbollah is no one else is helping with that burden. If anything, regional countries have only undermined it by assisting the United States in attacking Iran, by just cut off political ties and cut off trade. That would have been, in Latin America or in Africa, how can you expect a country to break off ties with the Israeli regime when Turkey doesn't, when Egypt doesn't, when Morocco
those
doesn't?
are all very valid points. Those are all very valid points. But I want to make sure I get to my last question that I want to ask you while we still have time. And hopefully we can have a longer conversation about all that in the near future. I wanted to ask you about, the details about the memorandum. We know from a draft that has been leaked or put out, and also various leaks from various sides. But Iran basically says it will retain a security and regulatory role over the Strait of Hormuz, alongside Oman, and then also you have U.S. is going to be unfreezing billions of dollars in Iranian assets that it had effectively stolen, alongside broader sanctions relief. And it's that's huge. I mean, those are huge, wins for Iran. So I guess, given all that, is this war a win for Iran and a defeat for the Americans? It surely seems that way if you look at the details of this. And it also kind of seems like the Americans have no choice. They either agree to this now or lose harder later.
For 60, Iran will maintain control over the strait, and everything that you said is true. Relief, of course, has to do with Iran's energy exports. No doubt that Iran won this war. Iran won the 39 days of battle with the United States and the Israeli regime and those proxies that assisted the Americans. And it's not that just Iran survived, which everyone across the world, people were stunned. It wasn't that Iran just survived, because many were saying if Iran just survives, they win. No, Iran, till the very end, were pounding them day and night. And the damage that Iran did to the US, to the Israeli regime, and to their proxies in the region was far greater than the damage they did to Iran. and I mean in sheer in costs. Of course, Iran is trying to create an environment where regional countries neighboring the Persian Gulf will distance themselves from the United States and normalize their relationship and build a new relationship which would be beneficial to everyone in our region and would be very bad news for the Israeli regime. But in any case, then the Americans imposed siege warfare, and they lost again. They were the one reason why Trump gave those concessions when Netanyahu struck Dahi again and Iran was about to fire its missiles was because, in my opinion, this is just my own interpretation of events, my own understanding. He knows that the economy is about to go off a cliff and that in July things are going to get very bad and the shortages are going to hit and so on. So I think that he was afraid that Iran would fire missiles, which Iran was going to do, and then the Israelis would hit back and then Iran would strike and then there would be a few days of war until the Israelis would back down. And then this process would be delayed a few more weeks. And he probably just said, no, I have to get. So immediately before Iran fired those missiles, he went and gave those concessions. So Iran won the war, Iran won the siege, and so far Iran has won at the negotiating table. However, we do not trust the Americans. We do not. The Israeli regime is the most despicable regime in human history. So there's no way for us to trust them. So we're going to move forward without having any faith in the process.
Yeah, well, we'll have to watch for the signing on Friday. Apparently, there's already been an electronic signing, but there's going to be official signing in Geneva on Friday. It's kind of wild to finally witness this after 3 months of horrific war and just, an endless loop of Trump trying to win by, bombing Iran back to the Stone Age. But this certainly is not looking good for the Americans, and it's definitely a turning point in history for sure. Mohammed Marandi, I want to thank you for joining me. We look forward to having you back on soon.
Thank you very much for having me. So great pleasure.
Wow. Professor Marandi never misses. Just fantastic interview, Rania.
Yeah, and I want to apologize for the distorted look that I had. It's because I just got back to Lebanon and I turned my camera on and it just wasn't connecting to my computer. And I was kind of going crazy. What do I do? What do I do? And then it was time to do the interview. So I was like, well, I guess I'm doing this on a webcam. So I don't know if anyone noticed, but it's just not as sharp and nice and colorful. But
the
now my
content
camera
speaks
is
for
working.
itself.
That's true. That's true. But no, that was a great interview. Always good to hear from Mohammed Marandi. And, he's absolutely right about the fact that one thing that stood out to me, he said a lot of important things in that interview, but the idea that Iran normalized bombing Israel. They actually did normalize bombing Israel. So that's not seen as oh my God anymore. It's oh yeah, that makes sense. Even Trump was all right, Iran had to hit back. They did what they had to do. It's over now. It's just, It'll be interesting though to see, Zoe, how the Democrats react in the coming days. There's been a lot of pressure on them externally, from the progressive wing of organizations to basically beg them, please do not attack Trump from the right on this. Because some have, I know Cory Booker was out there. He's one of the highest paid, pro-Israel, one of the highest paid by the pro-Israel lobby is Cory Booker. And he was out there on the Sunday morning news shows doing what he does every single time we get close to a deal, which is attack Trump from the right and say this is basically a surrender. And it's look, it's not a surrender. However, it's definitely an American defeat. There's no question about that. But you got to take the L, because continuing on this path, on this war, is going to actually be a bigger loss later. The U.S. doesn't care about the global economy, but the global economy does impact the U.S. because it's the leader of the global economy. But it's just mind-blowing to me that you would have these Democrats.
No, and I mean, we played that clip from Debbie Wasserman Schultz last week, I think it was, where she just, ripped into Trump for this deal. And it's like, not only is this, catastrophic for the global economy, but hello, over 6,700 people at least have been killed and 1 million have been displaced in Lebanon. So, it's just they're ghouls. And I think it's important to note that even the fact that people are having to lobby the supposed progressive party in the United States so that they don't trash a peace agreement, like what happened to when everyone said, when they were asked how they want to change the world, and they would say world peace.
Well, no, exactly. And then also, like, everybody needs to place close attention to Lebanon, not just because Rania's in Lebanon.
Yeah.
That's me. But because of the fact that Lebanon is the part of this deal. I mean, one of the reasons Lebanon is such a important component for Iran is this is a real test. Are the Americans, willing to restrain the Israelis? Because at the end of the day, Iran fought a war that took a huge toll on the Iranians, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't do that for no reason. They did it in self-defense, first and foremost, but they also refused to capitulate because of the fact that they have leverage and they don't want another war. They want this to be the last war. And that means that they needed a guarantee from some sort of way to guarantee the Americans won't do it again. It has a higher cost for the Americans to do it again. What doesn't have a huge cost for the Americans is for the Israelis to do it again.
Right.
So one way to test that out is on Lebanon. Can the Americans restrain Israel and Lebanon? There's also the fact that, as Professor Morandi said, Hezbollah and Iran were partners in this war. Iran, a big part of including Lebanon and a ceasefire and a withdrawal is also because Hezbollah is a partner of theirs. There's also the fact that Iran does not want to see an expanded Israel. You let Israel stay in Lebanon, right, the Israelis are going to expand their borders. It's like what they're a settler colony. That's what they do. So there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think one of the most important ones is to force the U.S. to demonstrate whether or not it can restrain the Israelis. And if it can restrain the Israelis, then that means that, if they can restrain the Israelis on Lebanon, they can certainly restrain the Israelis on Iran, because Iran is bigger stakes for the Americans. So we'll see how that plays out in the coming days. But the reason I raise that is because the pro-Israel lobby groups are going into overdrive right now. Like, I was watching CNN on a lot of Sunday, and it was just like one analyst, commentator after another that's clearly on the Israel side, being like, but Israel still needs freedom of movement in Lebanon. It's really important for American
freedom of
security.
movement.
Like, really?
Freedom of
movement.
Like being able to. I mean,
it's for the security of Western civilization that the Israelis have to continue to demolish villages in southern Lebanon. They're trying to convince you of that. It's insane.
No, and I think, early on in the war, Rania, you interviewed Prabhat Patnaik, and he said that what happens in Iran and how Iran responds and what it is able to do in this war really is a sign for the rest of the global South about how it stands with regards to U.S. imperialism and its junior partners, such as Israel, such as Europe. And so I think what happens this week with regards to the Memorandum of Understanding, again, is not even just about Lebanon, but really about the ability for the global South to have any inch of sovereignty, and for the U.S. to respect minimum, at least kind of the deterrent factors that some of the countries in the global South have on the global economy. And, with all of that anti-colonial spirit, I did want to point out that yesterday, Cape Verde tied with Spain. We're talking about Spain, which has all of the money that it has, which is, one of these teams that is stacked with, players who are in all of the different top leagues. And Cape Verde, a small island that has been, that fought for its independence from Portugal, several decades ago under the leadership of Amilcar Cabral. And the fact that they were able to tie with Spain, being such a small nation, is historic. And I think a lot of people saw, I'm seeing in the chat that a lot of people are asking about, whether to watch a World Cup, whether to boycott. And for me, I say I pay attention to the World Cup for these beautiful moments where you see, a formerly colonized country go up against a European power and tie.
I love it. I
Like,
love it.
we
That's
love
one of
that.
the best parts of the World Cup. Yeah.
Exactly. And then later today at 3 p.m. in just an hour and 40 minutes, Senegal will face France. Really hoping for a similar outcome. Obviously, France is one of the top teams in the world.
Although how many people on the French team are African?
No, basically all of them. So if you watched our episode last week, we had on Nicholas Mwangi, who's our BT correspondent based out of Nairobi, Kenya, and he talked about all of the deep corruption and, just complicity of the FIFA in so many issues and whatever. So none of us have any kind of ideas and fancy notions about if FIFA's good or not. We hate FIFA. It is corrupt. It is complicit. Infantino's like Trump's best friend. But, the whole world is watching the World Cup. So we will be watching. We will be rooting for Senegal, or at least I will be. And hopefully everyone else. And so we will be back on Thursday. And I can say with 95% certainty that our Thursday episode will be behind the paywall. We will be doing Q&A. We will be contacting you tomorrow to all of our members. Yeah. Yes, only if you're a member and a subscriber on Patreon, because we are not leaving our patrons out of this. We will be asking you for Q&A or just the Q. We will be providing the A. And we will be with you on Thursday once again. And so make sure to look out for that message. Tomorrow we will have a final answer.
And for those who weren't paying attention at the beginning, if you want access to this live stream moving forward, you will need to become a member by going to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. Become a member. You'll be helping to support and sustain an independent media outlet that's crucial in this moment of just propagandistic tsunamis all around. So support Breakthrough News, breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. Get access to this live stream moving forward. Again, you will still be able to see the segments. We will always be posting the segments with our guests, providing excellent commentary analysis on YouTube after the live stream. But if you want to catch it live and participate in the Q&A where you can ask me and Zoe questions and we will answer, become a member for as little as $5 a month. breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. More important than ever that you support independent media if you are able. If you already support us monetarily or aren't able to because I know things are tight, one very easy way you can support us is by making sure you smash that like button. Make sure you are subscribed to Breakthrough News on all social media platforms. If you want to do a one-time donation, you can also do that at breakthroughnews.org, or you can do it in a live chat right here on YouTube. We did get one anonymous donation a bit ago. I forgot to call it out. Thank you to Anonymous. And I think that's pretty much it for today, Zoe.
Yeah, and we'll be back with you Thursday. Lots of important stories coming this week. And please make sure to check out our website, breakthroughnews.org, where we have articles coming out every single day about the whole world. So stay tuned, and we'll be back with you on Thursday.